Nancy Sinatra thought she was just another celebrity in the crowd that night in Las Vegas. But halfway through the set, Elvis stopped the band, shielded his eyes from the lights, and asked her for a duet he'd never dared to sing with her before. What happened next brought Nancy to tears and silenced the whole room. August 10, 1972, Las Vegas Hilton Showroom. 2,000 people packed shoulder to shoulder. Smoke and perfume hung in the air, mingling with the hum of chatter and clinking glasses. The chandeliers glimmered under hot stage lights. The band tuned up as fans murmured in anticipation. Elvis Presley stepped on stage in a white jumpsuit, rhinestones catching every beam of light. The crowd erupted. Every eye turned to the king. But in a quiet corner near the stage, Nancy Sinatra sipped ginger ale, trying not to draw attention. She believed she was just one of many celebrities, a face in the glittering crowd. Yet, every so often Elvis glanced toward her direction. A small nudge of recognition. Nancy's stomach twisted. She had walked into this room thinking she could remain invisible. The cameras, the spotlight, the roar of fans. They all seemed distant. She wondered if anyone would notice when the music swelled. The band launched into the second song. A cheer rose, echoing off the walls. And then, mid-chorus, Elvis lifted his hand. The band cut abruptly. A hush fell over the room. Fans shifted, uncertain. The chandelier's glow reflected off frozen faces. Nancy froze too. Why did he look at her again? Why now? She hadn't spoken to him in years. Could he possibly remember that canceled duet from long ago? And if he did, what did it mean for tonight? The spotlight wavered as he leaned slightly forward, as if scanning the room for one person. And in that instant, Nancy felt a weight she hadn't carried in years pressed down on her chest. Nancy's eyes stayed fixed on the stage, but her mind slipped years backward, back to a time when everything between her family and Elvis felt close, but never close enough. Early 1960s. Studio hallways in Los Angeles. Posters of Frank Sinatra on the walls. Coffee cups everywhere. Young Nancy in bright go-go boots rehearsing lines with her father's team. Elvis, fresh from the army, visiting for a TV special. They crossed paths more than once, but always with people around. It felt like they lived in the same world but walked on different edges of it. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager, used to say, those two were always in the same building, but never in the same moment. And it was true. Nancy admired Elvis from a respectful distance, always aware she was Frank's daughter, a title that sometimes felt heavier than the spotlight itself. There was one moment, though, one real chance. A planned duet in 1967. The studio was booked. The microphones were set. Sheet music lay on a black piano bench. Elvis had already warmed up, humming softly as engineers adjusted levels. But Nancy never walked in. She canceled with a shaky phone call, blaming scheduling. But the truth was simpler and much harder. She was terrified. Terrified she wasn't good enough. Terrified she would disappoint her father, disappoint Elvis, disappoint herself. Fear won that day, and Elvis recorded alone. Nancy never forgot the look he gave her the next time they met. Gentle, understanding, but disappointed in a way he didn't say out loud. Sometimes the quietest things hurt the most. Now, sitting in the Las Vegas Hilton on August 10, 1972, she felt that memory crawl back into her chest like a cold wind. The crowd's energy was electric, but Nancy felt her heartbeat trip over itself. Elvis kept glancing in her direction, and it didn't feel random. What if he remembered? What if this night wasn't normal after all? A waitress passed by with a tray of drinks. Glasses rattled softly, almost in rhythm with Nancy's nerves. "You okay, Miss Sinatra?" she whispered. Nancy nodded, but her voice didn't come out. The room felt smaller, and still Elvis looked at her. Again, then again. The horns flared for the next song. The drummer tapped his sticks. The audience cheered, but Nancy's focus blurred. She could almost hear the old studio piano, the sound of her own breath when she backed out of the duet, the quiet disappointment in her father's dressing room later that night. All of it rushed back as if the past had stepped into the present. What do you do when life hands you the same moment twice? And what if the second time? The whole world is watching. The crowd roared as Elvis moved across the stage, white jumpsuit shimmering. He was smiling, joking, waving at tables. But there was purpose behind his eyes. A direction. A quiet aim. He wasn't just singing. He was searching. And then, as the horns swelled and the room vibrated with applause, Nancy felt it. He remembered. The third song rolled in with a punch of brass and a snap of drums. The Hilton showroom glowed under deep red lights. Fans clapped along. Some standing, some swaying, all wrapped inside the sound of Elvis Presley at his peak. The room felt alive, buzzing like a single heart beating too fast. But halfway through the bridge, something strange happened. Elvis lifted his right hand. Slow, calm, steady. The band froze. Just stopped. The last chord hung in the air like smoke, trembling before it faded. The crowd went silent. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. A few whispers fluttered around the room like nervous birds. The mic crackled. Elvis didn't speak yet. He scanned the crowd with narrowed eyes, shielding them from the spotlight's glare. This wasn't planned. Everyone felt it. James Burton, the bandleader, shifted his guitar. He eyed the setlist taped to the floor. Nothing like this was supposed to happen tonight. His eyebrows pulled tight as he watched Elvis ignore the entire script for the show. Nancy felt her breath catch. The seat underneath her no longer felt steady. She knew that look. Elvis wasn't searching the crowd. He was searching for someone specific. Her fingers tightened around her napkin until it crumpled. The spotlight operator hesitated, confused. Elvis tapped the mic lightly, the small echo bouncing across the ceiling. "Can we get a light?" he said quietly. "Right over there?" The spotlight jerked, drifted unsteadily across the audience, passing over faces that squinted and blinked. It landed on Nancy like a sudden sunrise. Her whole table lit up. Heads turned toward her. A soft gasp moved across the room. Nancy's shoulders stiffened. Her chest tightened. Not here. Not now. She shook her head, tiny, almost invisible. But Elvis saw it. He stepped one pace forward. The rhinestones of his jumpsuit flashed. His voice, warm and low, slipped through the speakers. "Nancy, you mind standing up for a moment?" Shock rippled across the crowd. A nervous laugh. A burst of whispers. Chairs creaked. Someone near Nancy whispered, "Is that Nancy Sinatra?" Another voice replied, "What's happening?" The sound of the room changed. It wasn't applause. It wasn't cheering. It was anticipation holding its breath. Nancy swallowed hard. She felt every eye on her. Every light. Every shadow. This wasn't the controlled world of a TV studio or her father's dinner parties. This was raw, public, unscripted. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her throat tightened. What would you do if someone pulled your past into the present in front of 2,000 strangers? Would you stand? Or would you disappear into your seat? Nancy wasn't sure she could do either. Joe Esposito, standing off stage, leaned forward with a worried frown. He whispered to a security guard, "This wasn't planned." But Elvis kept going. He took another small step. His voice dropped even softer. "There's something I've been meaning to ask you for a long time." A wave of tension rolled through the room. Even the air felt heavier. Nancy felt her knees weaken. She feared what might come next, but feared even more the thought that tonight might reopen a wound she tried to bury. A woman at the next table grabbed her husband's arm. "He's talking to her," she whispered. "Her." Nancy's hands shook. She pressed them to the table to steady herself. Her breath came thin, uneven. Memories of that canceled duet flickered through her mind like an old film reel. Then Elvis exhaled softly into the mic. Quiet sigh. A signal that something bigger was coming. The crowd leaned forward. The room dimmed around the edges. And just as Nancy tried to gather herself, Elvis looked directly at her and said 6 words that cracked the night open. "Nancy, would you sing with me?" Everything stopped. Everything changed. For a moment, Nancy couldn't move. Elvis's words hung in the air like floating sparks. Sing with me. Not planned. Not rehearsed. Not safe. The entire Las Vegas Hilton showroom went silent. 2,000 people waited. Glasses stilled. Forks hovered. Even the air conditioner hummed softer. It was as if the whole room leaned in, drawn by a force they couldn't name. Nancy felt heat rise in her face. Her pulse thudded in her neck. She shook her head again. Smaller this time, but Elvis didn't look away. His eyes softened. He wasn't challenging her. He was offering something she lost long ago. Another chance. Joe Esposito stepped closer to the curtain backstage, whispering, "Elvis, what are you doing?" But Elvis kept his focus on her. It was as though nothing else in the world existed. Nancy stood halfway, then lowered herself again. Unsure, the spotlight held her in place. Fans whispered her name. A few phones' old flash cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "That's Frank's girl." Nancy swallowed tightly. She remembered that old, painful night in 1967. The empty microphone, the untouched sheet music. The sense that she had disappointed not one man, but two. The weight of it never fully left her. And now it was back. Elvis stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Nancy," he said softly, "come on up, just this once." The crowd stirred. Some clapped encouragingly. Others gasped. A man near the front whispered, "Is this real?" Another replied, "This wasn't on the program." Nancy pushed herself to her feet. Her legs trembled like soft branches in wind. She placed her hand on the table to balance herself. A deep breath, then another. The room's eyes followed her with a strange mix of hope and fear. She took one step, then another. The carpeted floor felt uneven, too soft, like it wanted to pull her down. Elvis's expression never changed. Still calm, still gentle. He extended his hand toward her. A simple gesture. A lifeline. A short burst of shock shot through the audience. "She's actually going up." She said yes. "Oh my God!" Nancy reached the stairs. For a second, she froze. Could she really sing in front of all these people? Could she face Elvis again? After all these years? Could she face herself? What would you do? Would you step toward the moment that once scared you the most? Nancy did. She placed her shaking hand into Elvis's. His grip was warm and steady. He guided her onto the stage with the care of someone carrying something fragile. The lights hit her fully now, bright and unforgiving. Elvis walked her to the center microphone. He didn't choose a loud hit or a flashy number. Instead, he nodded to James Burton, signaling a quieter song. One filled with stories about fathers, daughters, distance, and longing. The band shifted softly. The piano began with gentle chords. The melody drifted slowly over the silent room. Nancy's throat tightened. She looked at Elvis. He gave a small nod, telling her without words that she wasn't alone. The crowd sensed the tension. No one shifted. No one coughed. It was like standing inside a held breath. She opened her mouth to sing, but nothing came out. Just air. Just fear. Elvis leaned closer. His voice brushed the mic in a soft whisper. "Just follow me." Nancy inhaled once more, shaky but determined. She tried again. A thin, trembling note slipped out. Elvis matched her volume, letting her settle into the sound. His presence held her steady like an anchor in deep water. The room melted into stillness. Her past. His voice. Their unfinished song. Nancy stepped forward, ready for the next line. But then Elvis sang something unexpected. One line not directed to the audience, but directly to her. A line that hit the deepest part of her life. And it shattered her. The piano softened, almost like it was stepping out of the way. Elvis lowered his voice, letting it slide gently through the microphone. Nancy tried to match his tone, her voice thin but steady. The room felt frozen in amber. Not a whisper, not a cough. Just 1,000 eyes watching two people rewrite something unfinished. Then they reached the line that changed everything. It was a simple lyric. A line about a father who was always close, but never quite there. Elvis turned his head, slow, deliberate, and looked at Nancy as he sang it. Not at the crowd. Not at the ceiling. Her. Her breath faltered. Her hands twitched at her sides. That lyric landed harder than anyone in the room could have known. It was like he had reached into a part of her life she never spoke about, pulled out the quiet ache she carried, and held it up to the light. A soft gasp rippled across the tables. Some people didn't understand the moment, but the ones who knew her family did. Because everyone knew Frank Sinatra wasn't like other fathers. He loved her. He provided for her. But he lived inside a busy world of shows, tours, late-night rehearsals, and scripts. He was a storm people admired from afar, but storms don't stay still. They move, they pull, they leave. Nancy had spent her childhood waiting for doors to open, footsteps to approach, phone calls to come. And sometimes they did. Sometimes he was a hero, but other times, he was a shadow passing through the house. Everyone saw Frank Sinatra, but not everyone saw his daughter. Her eyes shimmered. A tear formed, then fell. A thin trail of mascara ran down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. She couldn't. She was already holding herself together with the smallest threads. The crowd sensed something they weren't meant to witness. This wasn't a duet anymore. This was truth leaking through a song. James Burton looked down at his guitar, swallowing hard. Joe Esposito whispered backstage, "This is real. This is really happening." Nancy's voice cracked on her next note. But Elvis didn't push her. He softened instead, lowering his tone so she could breathe. His presence felt like a hand on her back saying, "It's okay. You're safe. Sing if you want to. Don't if you can't." Have you ever heard a sentence that felt like someone had been reading your private diary? What would you have done if those words found you in front of 2,000 people? Nancy tried again. Her voice quivered but stayed. The piano carried her gently. A single tear turned into two, then three. They slid softly off her chin, catching the stage light as they fell. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't shift. They just watched, quiet, reverent, almost humbled. You could feel a collective ache moving through the room, like everyone remembered someone they loved, or lost, or misunderstood. When the final notes melted into silence, Nancy's shoulders dropped. It felt like she'd been holding something heavy for years and finally set it down. The last chord faded. The room stayed still. Elvis didn't bow. He didn't step away. He leaned in close, so close that only the front row could see, and whispered something the microphone barely caught. Something meant only for her. Nancy's lip trembled. Her eyes widened. Whatever he said, it reached her deeper than the song did. And it changed her expression instantly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Nancy stared at Elvis, eyes red, mascara smudged, breath shaking. The crowd waited for a big showman moment. Maybe a joke, a bow, a smile. But Elvis didn't play to the audience. He leaned even closer, lips near her ear, and spoke so softly the mic barely registered a thing. The microphone caught only ghosts of sound. A breath, a syllable, faint vibration. But a fan in the fifth row had a small cassette recorder on the table, a habit from collectors who followed Elvis's shows. The tape would sit in a drawer for years before anyone replayed it. And when they finally did, they heard something hiding beneath the grit and hiss. "You should have never felt second best," Elvis murmured. Nancy inhaled sharply. Not a gasp. A wound reopening and healing at the same time. The tape captured her reply, faint and trembling. "I did, for a long time." Those 7 words carried decades of weight. Decades of pressure. Decades of being Frank's daughter instead of Nancy Sinatra, the woman. A waitress standing a few steps from the stage saw Nancy's hand shake as she lowered the microphone. The waitress later told friends, "It looked like someone lifted a boulder off her shoulders." Nancy stepped back slowly. Elvis didn't rush her. He didn't push the crowd into applause. In fact, he let the silence breathe. Let it live. Sometimes silence is louder than any cheer. Then Elvis gave a small nod to the band. The music resumed, soft at first, like it didn't want to break the moment. Nancy walked toward the side steps. Her legs felt unsteady, like they weren't used to carrying her true self. As she descended, the crowd finally reacted. Soft claps at first, then louder, then sincere applause that wrapped around her like warm light. Not applause for a celebrity. Applause for a human being who finally faced something she'd run from. A woman at the front table whispered, "I think that meant more to her than any record she ever made." Her husband nodded, wiping his eye discreetly. The moment had touched people in ways they couldn't explain. Nancy reached her table. Someone pulled out her chair. Her hands trembled as she sat down. She pressed a napkin to her eyes, trying to breathe. The spotlight drifted away, returning the stage to Elvis. But something subtle had changed. The next song Elvis performed had a softness in it that wasn't there earlier. His voice carried a tenderness that fans talked about for years. Some said they heard a slight shake in his voice. Others said he seemed lighter, as though helping Nancy helped him too. What do you think happens inside a person when they speak a truth they should have said long ago? And how much healing can hide inside a whisper almost lost to a tape hiss? Nancy looked up at the stage, her breathing steadying, her face still damp, the world spinning a little slower. She didn't know it yet, but the night wouldn't end here. Because years later, something unexpected would surface. Something small, something quiet, something that proved this moment stayed with her forever. Years passed. Some memories faded, but this one didn't. Not for Nancy. Inside her home in Beverly Hills, in a quiet corner near a window, sat a small wooden shelf. On it were family photos, awards, framed magazine covers. But the object she kept closest wasn't flashy or expensive. It was a single black and white photograph from August 10, 1972, Las Vegas Hilton. Nancy standing beside Elvis. A shared microphone. Her eyes still wet. His expression soft, almost protective. The photo wasn't from a photographer. It was from a fan who mailed it to her years later with a simple note. "I thought you should have this." She had no idea who the sender was. She kept it anyway. Next to that photo sat a worn cassette tape. A cheap plastic one. Labeled in faded pen, Hilton 72, Duet. It was the same tape the fan had recorded from the fifth row. The same tape where Elvis's whisper hid beneath the hiss. Nancy didn't play it often. Maybe once every few years. But when she did, she always closed her eyes at the same moment. The moment his voice softened and said, "You should have never felt second best." That line stayed with her, like a small light inside a quiet room. A plaque was eventually placed in the Las Vegas Hilton lobby years later, honoring Elvis's legendary runs. It listed dates, sold-out shows, and record-breaking crowds. It didn't mention the duet. It didn't mention the tears. It didn't mention how one song stitched a part of Nancy back together. But people who were there remembered. Some fans talked about that night on forums and in old letters. A few described it as the moment the show stopped being a show. Others said it was the first time they saw Nancy Sinatra as more than a famous last name. Sometimes the biggest stories don't make the headlines. Sometimes they live in a drawer, inside a cassette with fading ink. What quiet moment from your own life sits on a shelf, holding more truth than anyone else will ever know? Nancy kept the tape. She kept the photo. And every time she passed that shelf, she was reminded of a night when she stopped running from an old regret and finally stepped into her own voice. The world remembers Elvis as a king, but on that night, he gave someone else a crown she didn't know she deserved. If this story touched you, share it with someone who once needed just one honest moment to feel seen again. And tell us in the comments, have you ever had a single sentence change the way you saw yourself? Your voice might be the comfort someone else has been waiting for.